Right, I'm talking about the Manchester Martyrs, an event that happened in 1867. I knew vaguely about this, but not much. And it's come about because I'm giving a talk on the history of the Irish community in Manchester, at Good Neighbours in 2 weeks' time. So it's about the Manchester Martyrs. And there are the four of them. Now, I was also wondering whether to put the Manchester Martyrs in inverted commas, because it's very much a disputed history, this. Because in terms of Irish history, it is a magnificent show of intent against the occupation of Ireland by a foreign foe. And I'll come on to the role it's played in terms of Irish traditions since then. It's only when in the actual storming of the post office and various events like this that this stopped being the major feature of the Republican cause. So the Manchester Martyrs were important for all sorts of reasons. There were three of them: William Philip Allen, Michael Larkin, Michael O'Brien. They were members of the Irish Republican Brotherhood, which had been started in America. That surprised me for a start. But what happened, of course, was that both before the Irish potato famine in the 1840s, there'd been a lot of Irish emigration to America already, and there was huge emigration following that. And you can imagine that the people who left Ireland in great poverty and from suffering, the 1 million starved, there's huge numbers. It's an incredible event. They didn't harbour a very good image of the British occupation of Ireland, to put it mildly. So they established the Irish Republican Brotherhood, dedicated to ending British rule in Ireland. And they were executed because of an incident became known as at the time as the Manchester Outrages. The trio were members of a group of 30 to 40 Fenians that the Brotherhood became known as, the Fenians, who attacked a horse-drawn police van. Now, it must have been a pretty large police van, because there were, as well as the two Irish Republicans inside, there were other prisoners as well, each in individual little cells within it. So it's quite, I'm quite impressed that they were able to fit so many in. As I said, two arrested leaders of the Brotherhood, Thomas J. Kelly and Timothy Deasy, to Bellevue Jail. And Police Sergeant Brett, who was travelling inside with the keys, was shot and killed as the attackers were attempting to force the van open by blowing the lock. The Keeley and Deasy were released after another prisoner in the van took the keys from Brett's body and passed them to the group outside through a ventilation grill. The pair were never recaptured and eventually got back to America. There's a current, at the time, drawing, artist's impression of the freeing the Fenian leaders from the police van in 1867. It's a very elegant drawing, I think, don't you think? I think it's a very elegant drawing. The place it took place on is on Hyde Road in Gorton, on a place that then was on a bridge that was known as the Fenian Arch, and was eventually pulled down. When I moved into a flat in Manchester from living with my parents to live with two other students, we got a flat on Hyde Road, the least trendy area for students in Manchester, I think, and of which there are many stories, but I won't go there. But what I didn't realise was that the bridge I could see from our window was the Fenian Arch. Never knew it. Never knew it. It's strange little coincidences like this, don't they? They happen all over the place.
Yeah.
But anyway, this is the arch. So it was at 3 o'clock in the morning on September 1867. Colonel Thomas Kelly and Deasy were arrested by the English while loitering on a street in Shude Hill. Well, no wonder they were stopped, because it was 3 o'clock in the morning. But apparently they'd been to a meeting of Fenian officers in Manchester. So they were arrested and they were brought before a magistrate, and they were going to be remanded for a week whilst the attempt, and during that period, an attempted release was organised. So the 30 Fenians, armed with revolvers, shot one of the horses and called for the prisoner's freedom. When they went unheeded, they shot him through the keyhole. Now, what was interesting about that is that I don't think there was any attempt to kill Sergeant Brett. What happened was he went down to look through the keyhole to see what was happening. And just at that point, somebody shot through the keyhole to try and open the lock. And of course, it went through his eye, into his brain, and he died. So you could call it accidental in a way, but he certainly didn't commit suicide. He was killed. So you know, it depends which attitude you take towards that.
Yeah.
And come on to that. Here's another picture of it. The smashing of the van in 1867. So apparently Sergeant Brett, when called upon by the assailants to give them his keys, says, "I dare not. I must do my duty." And I must do my duties on the small plaque to him that exists now in St. Anne's Church in Manchester. So he was killed at that point. And there's another image, presumably having a train over the top to make it look more like a railway bridge. I don't imagine there was one going over at the time. You never know.
No.
But it was a chaotic scene, obviously, from whatever happened. Now, this is Thomas Deasy on the far left, showing the American connection at 1863 at Culpeper. I always love the name Culpeper because
I love the name Culpeper. Yes,
it was spices and things.
yeah.
Anyway, Culpeper, great name. Anyway, Virginia joined the American Civil War. He was aged 29 and originally claimed from Clonelkilty in County York. He emigrated to America, served in the 9th Massachusetts Infantry in the US Civil War. He was wounded at the Battle of the Wilderness in 1864, returned to Ireland after the war to take part in the Fenian Rising, where he commanded Fenian troops during the uprising in Mill Street in 1867. A busy guy. And here's another picture of him. Looks the part.
Good looking.
Looks the part. It's good. It's a good picture, though.
Quite handsome.
Now, this is there's a little, Manchester, I don't know whether other cities do it, but Manchester has blue plaques, which are for people, and then there are other ones, which are red plaques, which are for events. And this was for the Fenian ambush. Site of the rescue of 2 Fenian prisoners, leading to them being executed in the last public hanging in the Manchester area in November 1867. These are pictures of the Manchester Martyrs, who were the one. You can see from there a sort of the Irish iconography taking place, with them being in a flower, the obvious shamrock, and the phrase "God Save Ireland," which will become important later. We'll come on to that one. Now, this is where they were held, in the New Bailey prison. When the people talk about somewhere being held in somewhere in Manchester, I'm always interested into where it actually was. And it's at the end. Do you know Bridge Street goes over the River Irwell? The picture on the right is of the offices on the site of the prison, where the prison was, with the Arcadis, which I think was inundated by water a couple of years ago, flooded, and it's now closed down. But it was a fairly famous pub. But that's the site of where the New Bailey prison was, on the banks of the Irwell, as you can see from the artist's impression on the bottom left as well. Though I've never seen the Irwell that big or looking that tranquil, but there you go. Manchester's never made that much of its canals in the same way that other places have. Though I noticed there has been a Salford versus Manchester University boat race on the Irwell. I don't know whether they still do them. It hasn't quite got the romanticism of the Oxford-Cambridge one, has it? And this was the next day's newspaper. As you can see, it says execution of the Fenians at Manchester last Saturday. So it was done at the time, an artist's impression. I think it's an extraordinary looking scene. You can look at it. The wall of the prison where it was held was a special sort of gallows erected at the top of it. And it's estimated there were about 10,000 people watched the hanging. And
How grim.
you've just got to, this is a bit gruesome what I'm going to say now, but
It is very gruesome.
But you've got to be aware of what was entailed in this process. So shortly after the 8 o'clock on the morning of the 23rd of November, 1867, the 3 convicts were taken. There's a complicated hearing about it. There were over 20 original people in the accused of it. It got down to 4 or 5, and one of them was released on the request of the American government, and the other one because he'd served in the British Army, I think. But these 3 were the ones who were taken to the gallows. None of them had actually fired the shot that killed the policeman, by the way. They were taken to the gallows erected at the New Bailey prison. The authorities taking no chances, and there were over 2,500 regular and special police on duty, further enhanced by a detachment of the 72nd Highlanders and a squadron of the English Hussars. Huge presence. If reports of the execution are to be believed, and this, you've just got to go on what people have said about it, the hangman, called William Calcraft, was neither particularly proficient in the art or proficiency in the skills required to carry out his task as public executioner. Do you remember the last ever one in England, Albert Pierpoint?
Yeah.
He was he was very proud of the calculations they made. The calculations they made based on the weight meant that the length of the drop, in order to make sure that the neck, the head was severed from the neck.
Gruesome.
Yeah. But he was apparently renowned for his inability to make the necessary calculations. And apparently what he used to do to rectify any errors of judgment when calculating the length of the rope, he'd descend into the pit beneath the gallows and pull down on the condemned man's legs to give the finishing touches to the hanging.
Oh.
Well, reports indicated that Allen was dispatched with the minimum of fuss. Well, I mean, it's not pleasant, but he did die. Larkin didn't fare so well. And the executioner was required to do the thing of hanging onto his legs, but this didn't work. He had to undergo 45 minutes of mental torture as well as the physical pain of the hanging. One of the 3 Roman Catholic priests in attendance at the execution knelt beside him, holding his hand whilst praying. And that took 45 minutes. And this was witnessed by 10,000 people, including children. It's grotesque, isn't it?
Yeah. And thinking that this city, historically in folklore, had witnessed Peterloo,
Yeah.
So they're watching this political assassination of these 3, this would be political murder from an Irish Republican standpoint, which I would endorse. But, you think of all those ghoulish people watching who've seen what the British state did to them in terms of the folklore of the history of Manchester and Lancashire.
Yeah, thank you, Derek.
It's pretty gruesome, isn't it?
It is gruesome, and I'm going to come on the ambivalence that I feel about the whole thing as well, which grew on me because I've got a Catholic background, so I'm sort of intuitively, prejudiced in favour of it. But the more I looked at it, the less clear that became. Anyway, let's continue. This is Michael Larkin. The portraits they've done of these seem strangely feminine to me, but see what you think. So the bodies of the 3 martyrs, as they quickly became to be known, were quickly buried in unmarked graves of quicklime in unconsecrated ground within the New Bailey prison. That prison was closed in 1868, and the remains of Allen, Larkin and O'Brien were exhumed and reburied in Strangeways prison, which opened in 1868 as well, to take over from the other one, which was getting crowded in by housing and couldn't expand. And so was eventually pulled down, became a rail yard for a while, and then became offices, as I showed you. In 1991, the remains were exhumed once again and subsequently reinterred in a grave in Blakely Cemetery, also known as Moston Graveyard, along with other hanged prisoners also exhumed from Strangeways. There's the second one, which is William. See what I mean by the strange image of them?
Yes, she looks like he looks like a
Well,
woman.
That's what I'm just puzzled by that, but I don't know. Just my
They look very young.
Yes.
They all
very
were
young.
very young. They were in the, one, I think one of them was 19, the others were in their 20s.
Oh.
Yeah.
in-
quite.
This was a 19-year-old Alan. He wrote his last letter, this side of the grave, as he called it, hours from being hanged. A death that would make him and others heroes of Irish nationalism for generations to come. I am dying an honourable death, the 19-year-old Alan wrote. I am dying for Ireland, dying for the land that gave me birth, dying for the island of saints and dying for liberty. Every generation of our countrymen is suffering. And where is the Irish heart that could stand by unmoved? This is the final one, Captain Michael O'Brien, again looking oddly feminine, but that, what, by the by. The Irish community in Manchester marched a week after the executions, and up to 5,000 people attended a similar protest in Cork City. 50,000 marched in Dublin on the 8th of December that year, and there were large protest parades in New York City and Philadelphia through the end of the year and early into the following year. So you can see how it soon entered Irish Republican iconography. And this is the monument that was erected to the Manchester Martyrs in St. Joseph's Cemetery, Catholic Cemetery in Moston, unveiled by the Fenian founder James Stephens and Maud Gonne in November 1898. I imagined that's the earliest time in which they were allowed to do it, because feelings ran high on both sides, of course. It's on three sides, the medallion portraits of the three men originally surmounted by figures of the Irish wolfhound, which have subsequently gone, which I'll come on to. It suffered several attacks on its structure and acts of vandalism, as well as being listed as an at-risk monument by the Public Monument Recording Project. Police Sergeant Brett, meanwhile, and there were parades held in Moston on a yearly basis, which led to all sorts of troubles in 1970, which I will come on to. And they still meet every year, but just within the cemetery. You can go on YouTube and watch videos of them doing it a couple of years ago. So it still goes on. And also, they held celebrations in an Irish club, the Irish Club in Chorlton, less than a mile away from where I live. And I didn't know that was going on either. So you live and learn, don't you? But Sergeant Brett, meanwhile, what happened to him, his memory? Well, as I say, he was the first member of the constabulary to be murdered. And originally, it was in St. Barnabas Church in Manchester, and the tablet was removed when it was pulled down in 1959 to St. Anne's Square, to St. Anne's Church in St. Anne's Square, that I'm sure you're all familiar with if you go to Manchester, which apparently, which I didn't know, is the parish church of the Manchester City Police Force, which led me to another rabbit hole, which is Orangism in Manchester. I never knew that Orangism was really big in Manchester. I just didn't know that at all. It was the biggest area of the Orange Order outside Ireland itself in the whole of Great Britain. Yeah, in the first decades of the 19th century, Manchester was the principal centre for Orangism in Great Britain. You know why the colour orange, which you see, I've made it clear in the slide. The colour orange was adapted by them in memory and honour of the Protestant William of Orange, who seized the throne from Catholic James in 1688 and has been remembered ever since. The Orange Order was established in 1790s, following the example of the Freemasons, by admitting members after taking oaths and organising itself into lodges. Most of them in Britain were of soldiers who served in Ireland and after they were demobbed. So civilian discharged soldiers seem to have started civilian lodges which spread from Manchester to neighbouring towns such as Oldham, where Orange lodges held a 12th of July march as early as 1803. So Orangism was very big in Oldham, for those who knew that. And here is something I was hoping Tony might be here for this bit. This is St. Mark's Protestant Church in West Gorton, which was very strong amongst the Orange community. So members of the AF Amateur Football Club Gorton were Walter Chew and Lawrence Furness. There were several others who became a sidesman at St. Mark's Church and the director, chairman and president of Manchester City Football Club.
Oh.
Walter Chew played in St. Mark's first match and went on to become the secretary of both Gorton and Ardwick. He died in September 1948, and an obituary described him as one of the founders of Manchester City. Now look at that little badge of Manchester City. What do you notice about that? It's orange and blue.
Mm.
Well, I always knew that Manchester United was a Catholic club. Whenever you go there, you'd always see priests standing outside, you know, waiting to go in. They were always very honoured guests there. But I never knew that Manchester City went the other way. I'd certainly like to know Tony's views on that one.
There was quite a debate about that, you know, the image.
Yeah.
Because the boat is also a slave trade boat.
That's right, it is, isn't it? Yes. Yes, the same on the Manchester crest as well. Yeah. Yes.
Is that an English rose? The red?
Yeah. It seemed to be, didn't it? Let's just...
Lancashire rose.
Yep.
Yes, it is. Yep. Yep.
That's the two connections, Val, yeah.
Yep. So there you go. Now,
Belongs to everyone.
yes, but it's seen as a symbol of Englishness as well, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Now, bringing it to the 1970s. Do you remember this? On the 4th of September, the 4th of February, 1974, a coach carrying off-duty members of the 2nd Battalion, the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers and their families, taking them back to barracks in Catterick from Manchester, was blown up on the M62 motorway between Bradford and Leeds.
Ooh.
The bombing was claimed by the Irish Republican movement. Travelling on board this coach was a soldier who lived in Moston with his wife and young family, 2 small boys, who were killed in the bomb. The bomb went off right under them. A total of 9 soldiers and 3 civilians were killed in the bombing, and another 38 soldiers and civilians were injured. The entrance hall of the nearby westbound section of the Hartshead Moor service station, which some of you might have stopped at, was used as an impromptu first aid station for those wounded in the blast, and that's where there is a plaque. So one member of the people was Corporal Clifford Horton, whose entire family, consisting of his wife, aged 20, also aged 23, and 2 sons, Lee, aged 5, and Robert, aged 2, were also killed. So there is a picture of it at the time. Interestingly, as well, the woman who was prosecuted for that bombing, I thought I put down a name, but I've forgotten it now. She served 18 years in prison until she was released when she found that the forensic data had been falsely done, and she was a fantasist, and all her her interrogations were all forced, and she was eventually released and compensated after 18 years in prison.
God.
So it goes both ways again, if you see what I mean. So this is the site of the Fenian ambush. Now, memorials to those who were actually convicted of the death, there are memorials to them in County Offaly, County Limerick, the Maid of Erin, Kilrush in County Clare, Glasnevin Cemetery in Dublin, Ennis in County Cork, Clonmel, Tipperary, and various others. It is hugely remembered in Ireland, hugely remembered. There's also a wall mural in West Belfast depicting the Manchester Martyrs, requesting the return of their earthly remains. That's at the Heartstead services where that's the bombing memorial. As you can see, it's fairly small. And if you ever stop there, go and have a look at it. Oh, yes, I've got the name of it. It's Judith Ward. Judith Ward was convicted of the bombing, and she was shouted to all present when she was released. 18 years, freedom after 18 years. She was driven to a secret safe address pretending the conclusion of the legal hearing. The actual perpetrator or perpetrators of the M62 coach bombing were never arrested or convicted. And that's the monument in 2017. Now you can see of it, it's much barer than the original monument. And the reason for that is because the raids were, people were so outraged by the bombings in 1970. First of all, they disrupted the march that they held, the yearly march, and secondly, they vandalized the monument. You can see why. You can see why that happened, with the Orange Order in Harper Hay leading it, apparently. A Manical Condon in his speech, who wasn't actually executed for it, "You will soon send us before God, and I am perfectly prepared to go. I have nothing to regret or retract or take back. I can only say, God save Ireland." And with one step forward, his companions rose and extended their handcuffed hands upwards and cried out, "God save Ireland," which is where that phrase comes from. T.D. Sullivan, who witnessed the trial, was inspired to write "God Save Ireland," which became the virtual Irish national anthem up until the actual uprising in the 1920s.
Who is this man?
Captain Condon is called. He was one of the Fenians. He was given a reprieve, a life of hard labor, but after 11 years, in response to a unanimous vote of the United States Congress, he was banished for an additional 20 years and released to go to America, where he spent the rest of his life.
Perfect.
The noble-hearted free, by the vengeful tyrants stricken in their bloom. But they met him face to face with the courage of the race, and they went with souls undaunted to their doom.
The melody is very familiar.
It is. It's from the Boys Are Marching, Tramp, Tramp, Tramp. The Boys Are Marching, a battlefield ballad from the Union troops in the US Civil War. It was the first Irish political executions, the Manchester Martyrs, since Robert Emmet in 1803. The episode became a template for what happened 49 years later. Last bit, Friedrich Engels. In a letter to Karl Marx the day after the hanging, he wrote, "The Tories had accomplished the final act of separation between England and Ireland. The only thing the Fenians had lacked were martyrs. They've been provided with these, which will now be sung to every Irish babe in the cradle in Ireland, England, and America." It was clear that by the time of the Irish War of Independence, the executed leaders of the 1916 Easter Rising had replaced the Manchester Martyrs as icons of Irish revolutionary nationalists, and the Manchester Martyrs have faded from the scene, and that's the end of that. Any comments, anybody?
Fascinating.
Yeah, I think though, Bernard, good morning, everyone. Yeah, it's ever been thus between the UK and, well, England and Ireland.
Yeah.
Right the way back to the Vikings, when the Vikings grabbed the Irish to come over and work with them against the Anglo-Saxons. And there was that wall set up. And then, and in 1155, the only British Pope, what was his name? How about this? Pope Adrian IV. Actually allowed Henry II to go and invade Ireland and try and get rid of the Gaelic church and impose the Catholic faith on the Irish. And then, of course, they grabbed all that. And in Henry VIII's time, he broke off with the Catholic Church. He went back to Protestantism, turned back to Catholicism with Mary, back to Protestantism. So it just went on and on and on. So it's no surprise that there is this heroic view from both sides.
Yeah, that's really good. Just one point, and then you, Derek. Yeah, that's the problem. You go and look at a topic like this, and it just goes on and on and on. There's no place you can stop. Yeah, but Derek, over to you.
Well, I think it's really important. It's like the way the British ruling class regarded Mandela, you know, as a terrorist. This is the reality. You've got to separate who is the oppressor, and the oppressor is the British state. So as you can imagine, I was very politically active during the 70s when the IRA were bombing and so on. And we had huge political arguments with them about their tactics, you know, and ridiculously, you know, they attacked Manchester and they attacked working class people. But the starting point has to be, as a revolutionary socialist, and that's what I am, is that Britain are the oppressors in Ireland. Ireland should be free, without a doubt. It's a history you're looking at, without a doubt. You know, these people were on the side of Irish liberation in the same way as Mandela was on the side of the liberation of people in South Africa against apartheid.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Derek. It goes back to the 1500s when the British Parliament decided the only way to control Ireland to impose the British view on the Irish, so that they could bring those two areas together. And it's always been from that. So it's very much the oppression of the British against the Irish.
Okay,
and
we're going to have to leave it there because it's last minute now, and we could have a long discussion about this.
Yeah, we could carry on anytime.
Thanks, Bernard.
Okay, thanks everybody for coming. And
Thank you, Bernard.
I'll
Thanks,
I got,
No, it was really good. Well presented.
Thank you.